Welcome to the Modise Network. In the show today, we focus on the Constitutional Court's ruling that corporal punishment is not the appropriate form of discipline for children. Then we discuss the concerns about early childhood learning, particularly reading and writing for comprehension. And we'll end the show with the union Solidarity deciding to take matters in their own hands and establishing a private Afrikaans language university. The ruling by the Constitutional Court that corporal punishment as a form of chastisement of children, even in the home, was against the Constitution was welcomed by most children's rights groups and rejected by some cultural and religious organizations that felt that the responsibility of raising disciplined children was being taken away from parents. The question many ask is, what alternative forms of chastisement are there? And who is going to take responsibility for unruly children who are prone to aggression in this violent society? To discuss this topic, I'm joined by a family lawyer from Beverley Clark of Clark's Attorneys in Johannesburg. And Beverley, welcome. As well as Shahana Mai, who's with us from our Cape Town studios. She's social worker at the Parent Center. We are inviting you to join the network, commenting on social media using the hashtag the Modise Network. And Shahana, let me start right away with you for your reaction. Your consortium of different organizations was very much interested in this matter. What is your immediate reaction to this?
Thank you very much for having me on. As part of the Parent Center, we actually welcome this judgment. It's something that we would really be very happy to contribute in terms of the societal expectations of preventing corporal punishment and allowing parents to understand that there are alternative ways of disciplining the children. Harsh punishment is not a way of maintaining the family structure and the family stability, and as the Parent Center, this is our main focus, to raise positive, healthy families and resilient children. So we welcome it.
All right, we'll look at what the other groups are saying and whether there are alternative forms to disciplining children. And Shahana, you'll have to come in through with those ideas. But Beverley, just give me the ordinary person's interpretation of this judgment. What does it mean?
Well, Tim, it means that we're all bound by the Constitution. And so I think it was only a matter of time before this came before the Constitutional Court, because Section 12 of the Constitution, or Section 12(1)(c), which I think is what the judges relied on, says that everybody has the right to physical security and freedom from all forms of violence, whether from public or private sources. So that then brings, the judges looked at the definition of violence, which is the intentional application of force with the intention to harm, to cause hurt, not harm, but hurt. And they said that clearly corporal punishment falls within that definition. And then the Constitution is clear that we're entitled to freedom from all forms of violence, and children are considered to be independent human beings who also have rights. And the court looked a lot at Section 28 of the Constitution, which says that the best interests of children are of paramount importance in all matters concerning children. So that doesn't mean they're one of the factors, and we can also take into account culture and religion and whatever. They are of paramount importance. And so it was really the inescapable conclusion that that corporal punishment must be outlawed even in the home.
Well, Shahana, I've got to come back to you here because you say there are alternative forms of chastisement that parents should explore. But you're talking about a society here where culturally, even from a religious point of view, many parents will tell you that spare the rod and spoil the child, and that's how they were raised.
That is a very common factor, and people use that as probably a form of excuse or a form of just justifying their behavior at the moment. I think we first need to look at what does discipline mean, and it comes from a Latin word which actually then gives you an understanding of teaching, whereas punishment comes from the Latin word which actually gives you an understanding of pain. And when we're causing pain to someone, whatever harm we're causing, physical or emotional pain, there are negative consequences to that. So I think, yes, parents do say we have been brought up being punished and we're quite okay, we've turned out fine, so there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of understanding what are we doing to the self-esteem of the child, what kind of adult are we raising, we need to understand that there's an energetic flow between the parent and child and their relationship. And if the energetic flow is negative, there are consequences which then can breed something. And we look at our society, we look at intergenerational violence, we look at violence against women, violence against children. All of that breeds from somewhere, because hurting people often hurt people. So at the Parent Centre, our focus is to help parents understand that the child may not be able to voice their feelings, but they voice it through their behavior. And if it's something that's unacceptable to us as a parent, we need to look internally to see why are we not feeling in control enough to be able to handle that child's behavior and to teach the child a different form of acting out or sharing what they're actually feeling. So that would be a broader perspective on our view from that.
But you know, the other argument, Shahana, that can be raised in the South African context, and I'm sure there are many people who are raising this, is that we are a very aggressive and violent society. So to try and implement this approach that we are discussing this morning, and I'm sure you will come to the specifics of the other forms or ways of parenting that are not violent, but are there any societies that we can compare with where these approaches that we're discussing this morning are being applied and we can learn from?
Basically through our own experience at the Parent Centre, in through our satellite offices and our head office in Cape Town. We've been running these programs, we've been around for 35 years. We've been running a course called the Parenting and Leadership or Positive Parenting, getting people, parents, caregivers, people who are interacting with children to understand the alternative forms. And through those years, we have had enormous success. So besides looking outside, we need to look internally. And yes, in Cape Town, we have seen success and results with that. It's a new form of a mindset. It's a shift of behavior. It's a shift of attitude. And we're inviting the adult or the parent or the caregiver to actually look internally and see, how am I managing this internal shift within me, and how am I going to then present it to the people, the human beings who I've been given a trusting relationship with, the human beings who I want to bring up into a society that I hope will be different.
And Beverley, the cultural groups and religious groups, but let me stay with cultural groups for a moment, can make a case, an argument, and say, you know, we're talking about this ruling by the Constitutional Court, but what happens to some of our cultural practices where we teach children deliberately how to fight, how to use violence to defend themselves or to advance whatever interests? An example that comes to mind is that of stick fighting in, for instance, in the Zulu culture or even in the Xhosa culture in the Eastern Cape. Does the court have anything to say about that? That on one hand, you're saying the intention is to achieve what you explained at the beginning of this conversation, but then in the cultural context, we actually encourage children to do that. And the only way to teach them how to fight is to fight them, to beat them up.
Tim, I would think that stick fighting would come under the umbrella of sport, so it would be the same as boxing, for instance. But where people consensually choose, boxing or wrestling, people consensually choose to fight, but within their rules, and it's a sport essentially. Whereas when you have a power differential between a parent and child, I think that's one of the issues, and I think that the court really emphasised. And the previous court that made this judgment, Judge Keatley, emphasised the issue of equality. So if it is assault for me to hit you, hit an adult, why then is it not assault when you hit a child who's a more vulnerable member of society? And so I think that if one just asks oneself that, it simply doesn't make sense. it's unlawful assault if I do it to
Sure.
an adult and yet not to a child.
And I understand it in the constitutional context, but I'm raising the question in that cultural context. Maybe Shahana can share with us her own thoughts on this.
Yes, and let me just say one more thing,
sure.
which is that again, Section 28 makes the best interest of the child paramount, so more important than any other interests.
Okay, Shahana, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I agree with Beverley in terms of the best interest of the child. That is something that we need to take into account. Also the fact that as adults, we are the adults and we are the parents in that relationship. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we need to take that role. Because discipline is actually not a democratic process at all. Somebody needs to take charge. And if the adult does not take charge, the child does. And the child does not have the experience, the insight, the knowledge to behave in a proper way. And the child will then behave uncontrollably. So if the adult takes responsibility, the adult then learns how to manage their behavior and work that through. In that relationship will develop a lot better that way. Because the child wants grounding. A child wants a base of security. A child wants routine. A child wants guidance and perspective. And they look to the adults. If it's not their parents, it's their role models in society, it's family members, it's teachers, it's whoever else they see in the world that they interact with. So we need to understand that, and that's why this is not about criminalizing adults for chastising children. It's just about changing the mindset to say, excuse me, this is a human being that you're interacting with, just like you would like to be treated with respect. Let's learn how to treat the child with respect and don't enforce something. Don't enforce something where you're creating a fear. And then the behavior pattern will then be out of fear rather than a changed behavior pattern, which then will last for a lot longer that way.
I'd like to hear a couple of ideas from you, Shahana, on what kind of approaches parents can adopt now. Those who raise children according to the dictum, the teaching that you've got to use the rod to get the child to be disciplined. For them to change, where do you start?
What we do is we actually run a workshop called Positive Parenting, and it's a 7-week workshop. And the interesting thing, people come in with expectations of, we want to learn how to discipline our children. We want our children to listen to us. We want to be able to get things in order and have the family in a more cohesive environment. We spend the first 4 weeks of those 7 weeks on relationship building, because that is the key factor. If that foundation is not in place, the child will not listen to rules. The child will not obey the parent's instruction. So we focus on helping the parent understand, where are you at in your life? What's happened in your life experience? What is your self-esteem? What has impacted you differently to how you are as a parent right now? We help the parent understand the child's developmental stage, because in different ages of development the child will behave differently because their expectation, understanding of the world is different. So helping the parents to see that. How are you interacting, engaging with your children? Are you developing a sense of cohesiveness, a sense of uniformity, a sense of feeling of belonging and security? All of those are important. Then we teach the parent simple skills like listening skills. How to praise the child descriptively rather than lavish praising, which the child will then know, really this isn't actually how you're meaning things. We teach the parent then how to speak in a way of communicating assertively, not aggressively.
Sure.
So all of those come into play before we actually tackle discipline, which we have a model to teach with the parents that way.
Well, Shahana, thanks very much for that, and we will pick up the conversation in a moment. My guests are Shahana and Beverley. We are discussing the Constitutional Court's ruling or judgment this week that violence or corporal punishment is regarded as violence against children, and that parents should desist from that. And we're also learning other forms of chastisement, but we live in a particular context, and that's what we're going to explore in a moment.